Hey guys, Score with Camel ADV. I'm going to do the install video today for our version 2 high Fender kit on the Honda Africa Twin. A few changes between the version 1 kit and the 2. The biggest difference is the fender mounting bracket. This is the version 1 and it's much bigger than the version 2. And we've actually moved the manifold for the brake hoses to the back of the fender bracket. And this allows use with a bunch more crash bar systems. There were some compatibility issues between our version 1 and crash bar systems that weren't out when we originally launched this. So that's been rectified on the version 2. Your V2 high Fender kit is going to include the following pieces. We've got the billet bracket and manifold. We've got our fork guard adapter brackets. We've got our hose guides, zip ties, braided stainless brake lines. We've got banjo fittings in here, new crush washers, and our P-clamps. We've got 2 pieces of abrasion resistant tape. And then we've got 4 bags that will have miscellaneous fasteners in them. I'm going to start by taking off the bolts that retain the factory low fender. We're going to reuse 4 of these. And there's some plastic covers here that trap the factory brake lines. And we're going to pop these off. I'm just going to pop the ABS line out of the keeper here, and then we're going to do this 8mm head here. We're going to come up to the back underneath the triple here, and there's a bolt that retains this clip that holds the hose on, as well as the ABS line, and it's just on the back side. And then we're going to go along and unclip the ABS wires off of the brake line. And on the metal clamp here, you're going to have to spread it. Pull that out. Once we've got the lines disconnected and the bolts out, we can take the fender off. And you have the little legs on the back here. You have to just push them through between the forks. And then you can set this aside. And with the fender off, we're going to take the factory brake lines off, and you are going to lose the brake fluid when you do it, so you want to make sure you put rags down and wipe off any finished surfaces. Brake fluid is quite corrosive and will take paint and powder coat off. This is the single banjo is going to go on the left hand side of the brake manifold on our fender bracket, and the double banjo bolt from the left side is now going to go to the right side. Just going to set these on the towel here. Set this crossover hose aside and be careful because it will be leaking brake fluid as well. And then in your kit, there's a bag that has 3 new brake lines in it. Open that. So these hoses have a straight fitting and one that's on an angle. And the angle is at the top, and it's going to come off the manifold, angling out away from the bike. So when you put these on, they're going to mount like this. And we're just going to put these on now to help stop the fluid from leaking out of the calipers. So new banjo bolt, new copper washer, another copper washer, and we're just going to put these on lightly for now. We need to loosen them and move them out of the way to get the caliper or the hose bracket in here. So the new upper brake hose is from Caliper, and their system is a little bit different. We've got a brass disc here, a little ferrule that drops in, and there's no up or down. It just drops in to the fitting like that, and then our hard line attaches into it or butts into it. So it can be a little fiddly to get it in and attached to the hard line on the bike. So the fitting we need is the lower block fitting here, and you can get a full-size wrench in here, but if you have a cheap one that you can cut down, it makes life a little bit easier. So I like to crack this line first before we undo the block fitting. And again, you're going to get a little bit of brake fluid out of here, so just be aware of that. When we go to install the new line, you're going to come over top of the triple clamp, and that brass disc is already in here. So we're going to stick it in like that, and then we're going to start this and I like to wiggle this as you tighten that nut, just finger tight, and it just helps get that get the brass disc centered and seated properly. And then we're going to take our 6mm bolt, factory bolt, and put it back in. And then we can do our final tighten on the block, and then we can do our final tighten on the inverted flare nut. And once we have the lines on the bike, we can install the fender bracket, the manifold. And what we're looking for out of that parts bag is the taper lock insert. And then we come to the front of the bike. And our brake hoses from the calipers. Said the fitting should be flaring, the line should be flaring away from the bike. And on the left-hand side of the bike, this is just going to go directly on here. And on the right side of the bike, we have our upper line that we just put on, is going to go on first. And then the caliper hose is going to stack on top of that. So we're going to be using the double banjo bolt that was originally in the left side caliper. So we've got copper washer on the double banjo bolt, Take our caliper line, put it on, take another copper washer, take our upper hose. It's going to have a bend in it like that around the triple, but that will swivel once we get it installed. And we're going to start that into the manifold. I'm going to take the single banjo bolt. It was on the right-hand side of the bike. And a new copper washer. And our caliper line. And when we do this, make sure that you don't have the ABS line looped through the caliper hose. It will cause you some issues with routing later. On the back of our fender bracket, we've got a tab here with a slotted hole, and there's a threaded hole on the back of the triple clamp. So we're going to put this M6x20 bolt through that hole and into the back of the triple. So we're going to slide the taper lock insert into the steering stem. And then we're going to start this bolt. And it's best to do it with that taper lock loose, so you have a little bit of wiggle to get it started. And with that snugged up, we can do the taper lock. And now we're going to install our hose guides, and this guy tucks underneath the top caliper bolt. So we're going to need to loosen the hose to pull it out of the way so we can get this bolt out. And we're going to put the bolt through our hose guide like that. We're going to add some Loctite to the bolt before we put it back in. I've had a couple people ask why we don't include Loctite with the kit. If you're working on bikes, it's something you should just have in the shop, and just a bottle this size will last you years and years. And we're not going to totally tighten that up just yet. In your parts bag, there's an M6x25, and a flat washer, and there's a spacer as well. So we're going to put the spacer between the boss on the fork and the hole in the hose guide. Start that. And again, just a drop of Loctite. And with that snug, we can tighten up the caliper bolt. And before we put the bolt and spacer through this hose guide, we'll make sure that we have the ABS line in between the two. You're going to put the P-clamp around the grommet on the ABS wires. It's just going to tuck in behind there like that. And we're going to do the same thing on the brake hose with another P-clamp. So we're going to take an M6x16 bolt and our two P-clamps and put the bolt through the hose guide, through the first clamp, through the second clamp, a flat washer on the back. These clamps are kind of spring loaded, so it is a bit of a bear sometimes to get these guys started, get this nut started. Got it there. And then a 10mm wrench on the nut on the back side. Then we're going to come down and we're going to zip tie around the grommet and around the brake hose. You don't want to do this super tight. You don't want to dig into the covering on the brake hose, but you want to make sure that it's tight enough that things aren't going to wander around. And we're going to add another one a little bit higher up. You want to make sure you have the ABS wire on the outside of the brake hose. If you have it on the inside and you get any slack, there's a possibility you can hook it on the tire and pull them out, which is obviously an issue. Take our P-clamp again. Another M6x16. Our flat washer and nylock. We're going to mount our fork guards in here. Something to be aware of with the guards, it's really common on regular upside down style forks, is the fork guards can move around and you can scrape up the upper fork legs. So we have included this abrasion tape. It looks ridiculous. It's really soft and clear and it doesn't look like it would do anything, but it is really amazing stuff. I've been running this on my bike for basically the last season, and it's held up really, really well in this application. You want to make sure your hands are clean, don't have a bunch of oil on them. And this is an inch wide. This is the same thickness as the bottom of your fork leg. And we're just going to put it on just above the edge of the seal and wrap it around. You need to be careful coming around the backside by the tire. A little bit harder to keep it tight and not have it stick to the tire. Then it's going to overlap by about 2.5 inches, and then you can just go around, kind of roll it up on the bell here. And you can't tell it's there once it's on. We're going to go and do the other side. Is it just above the edge of the seal? We've got our fork guards here. We've got our adapter brackets, and the adapter brackets mount to the two bosses on the bottom of the fork leg, like that. So when we come up with our fork guards, we've got two embedded nuts here, so there's no nut required on those. And this one, we're going to use a regular standard M6 nut. It's going to go in the back rather than the embedded one. The reason that we did that rather than a third embedded one is with the different manufacturers, you get a little bit of different radius in here, and sometimes it doesn't match the guard bracket as well as it should. So this just gives us a little more adaptability. The issue is, once it's mounted on the bike, it's really difficult to get that nut on there. So there's a trick to do this. And we're going to take the shoulder bolts here. There's 5 of them in the kit. And we're going to get them started into the fork guard brackets. I'm going to snug those guys up. The 5th one's going to go through like that with the nut on it. But before we do that, once we have these 2 in here, we're going to take the drill and we're going to drill through the outside of the fork guard. Like so. Once we have the hole drilled, I'm going to take the shoulder bolts back out, or even just loosen them off. I'm going to take one of the bolts from the factory low fender, put it into that upper hole, and then re-bolt everything. Standard nuts. Like so. With the hole through the side here, you can access that bolt when it's assembled on the bike. So if you go to take the fork guards off, you don't have to take the guard off and then the bracket. You can do it all in one piece. And your socket is just going to fit through like that. So I'm just going to put a dab of blue Loctite on that factory bolt. So you're going to take the bolt that we just put through the fork guard and into the top bolt on the fork boss. Take the second factory bolt here and get it started as well. This bottom hole is slotted, so we have some adjustment with the fork guards. So you want to kick them out just a little bit so we don't have the rubbing that I mentioned earlier. So on the left side fork guard, we have to work around the ABS wheel speed sensor. So we do need to trim this a little bit. I'm just going to mark your guard here off the end of the bracket and come up right up there. And that's going to get cut out. Regular tin snips work pretty well for this. Two more factory low fender bolts. Yeah, just a dab of Loctite. And make sure you have the wire for the ABS between the two bosses here. And just try to match the angle up with the adjustment here, side to side. So now we can install our fender. This is the KTM Supermoto fender. There's the parts list on our website that has the number for this. This is my favorite fender. It's full width, but it's a little bit shorter, so it doesn't stick out nearly as far. I think it's the best looking fender. The white one is nice because it's got the black stripe down the middle. There's a black one, but because it's a KTM fender, the stripe down the middle is orange. So if you use that one, you'll have to use some plastic paint like Krylon to either paint it white or black. So there's two different length of bolts. These big flange M6 bolts. There's longer and shorter. The shorter ones go in the front. I mean, these two holes here. And then the longer ones go in the back too. If you're using a KTM Freeride fender, you're going to use the front and the middle holes. The 4 outside bolts are a very common bolt pattern for fenders, so if you're using a Universal or a Honda Yamaha, it's a good chance you'll be able to use these. And our bolts to get started. And make sure that you have the ABS line up out of the way so it doesn't get pinched. And with our fender attached, we're going to put another set of P-clamps down here. We're just going to drill right in the corner here. I'm going to loosen these off so that the brake lines come down a little bit straighter. And I'm not giving you specific measurements on where to put this. It'll vary a little bit with your particular fender, but you want to be fairly close to the fork. And we're just going to drill a little bit here. And we'll take our M6x16s again with the flat washer from the inside out. You're going to drill these holes at least 6 mil. If you have a 1/4 inch bit, that's 6.4. That works well as well. And once we have that P-clamp on here, we can tighten our banjo bolt on the top. And the banjo fitting is going to want to move a little bit when you tighten it, so just put your thumb in front of it to keep it in line. You don't want to put these P-clamps too far down here at full suspension extension. If they're down here, your hoses are going to be too tight and they're going to limit travel in the suspension and end up damaging the hoses. So there's a little bit of movement here with the hose. You want to make sure that the hose is underneath the ridge here for the triple clamp, but that it's down low enough that there's not an issue of it getting pinched. There's a web right here that a lot of the crash bars mount into. So you want to cycle your steering back and forth and make sure that either direction you're not pinching the hose. We're hitting the fender here with the fitting, so you just want to push it up a hair, and then we're going to tighten it there. And that's below the triple and above the fender, and we have lots of room to that web. Once you've got all the parts installed on the bike, you can go ahead and bleed the brakes. Bleeding brakes is a pretty straightforward process if you know how to do it. If you're not comfortable doing it, I would suggest taking your bike to a qualified shop. It is, of course, brakes, so they're pretty important. If you have any questions about the product, you can send us an email, info@cameltank.com. Thanks for watching.